Welcome. I'm so glad to see everybody on a nice Monday morning that isn't too cold and too frosty and too slippery. I'm Susan McPhee. I'm the Winchester Energy Conservation Coordinator, and we're here to hopefully review quickly WinPower, the state of play, and then mostly take your questions because I know there's a lot of questions out there. So WinPower is the town's, we'll go to our next slide here. WinPower is like a group purchase. It's sort of like BJ's, but just for Winchester residents. So it's the citizens of Winchester. We got together and said, oh my gosh, you can pull together and get a better rate for power. So this is only open to Winchester residents. You're never going to get a phone call at dinner time. You're not going to get a piece of mail or somebody knocking on your door from WinPower. We put it in the newspaper and we put it in the water bills. That's it. Anybody else who's pretending to be something from the town, it's not WinPower. So the town is not making any money on this. This is a service that the town wanted to put together for residents because we're cognizant that there are so many there are some bad actors, there are some marginal actors, but there's certainly a lot of for-profit institutions out there trying to sell you energy supply. So let's dig into this. So that was the number one reason we did this, to try to make it a benefit to the residents of Winchester. So again, never a phone call, never a letter in the mail from WinPower. WinPower is called WinPower because it's Winchester and it's only the residents and small businesses. So how did this happen? In 1997, the state legislature said, okay, we're going to go capitalistic here. We are going to let anybody come into this. We're going to give the residents of the state the chance to choose their electricity supply. So that's called, it's the free market. It was like, this is going to be great. Free market, we'll get better prices. But now we've seen it's kind of turned into, there's a lot of people out there trying to sell us power, and it's really confusing. So Eversource is our delivery system. That doesn't change. Your bill is always going to come from Eversource. They own the poles, they own the wires. That does not change. This is just about what's called the supply. So who's putting the energy or the electrons onto the grid that we are using. So you can change your supplier anytime you want to change your supplier. If you don't do anything, it's called Eversource Basic. But now if you don't do anything, last June we changed, if you don't do anything, you go on WinPower because we think we got a better deal than Eversource. In 1997, when the state legislature turned it to open slather and not just the utilities, so you could buy your supply from anybody, they also said that the utilities, Eversource, has to go out to bid every 6 months. So there's no way of predicting what your bill is going to be if you get your supply from Eversource. Remember, the rest of your bill, all those lines, it's always going to be Eversource. But that supply line, if you go with Eversource, it changes every 6 months. And they will tell you that they don't make money on it. But by statute, state legislature, they have to go out to bid every 6 months. So for anybody on fixed income, that's a tough road because you don't know what's going to happen. So that was the other reason that we wanted to do WinPower for the town. We can go out to bid and get a contract that's at a fixed rate for a time certain. So we have a 30-month contract that started in July and it goes for 30 months. So we're in our second 6 months. So Eversource, every 6 months it's going to change, right? But WinPower is not going to change. So we started out about equal to WinPower, to Eversource, and then Eversource announced their winter rates and they went way up. So now WinPower looks pretty darn good compared to Eversource. Well, what's going to happen next time they go out to bid? Who knows? So we know what our price is, and that's what I just want to assure everybody here. We're not out to make money. We're just out to make it easier and hopefully to save residents money compared to the for-profit people out there and also compared to Eversource Basic. So that's kind of the lay of the land of how we got here. The current structure, 85% of residents, as I said, if you do nothing, you wind up in WinPower. So 85% of Winchester residents are currently in WinPower. If you want to play around with the for-profit, see if you can get a better deal, be my guest. But just know that it is for-profit. We are not for-profit. So it's going to be tough to beat our prices. With WinPower, you can opt out at any time. If Eversource comes out with their next rate in 6 months and they're down miraculously 50%, opt out, go for it. Now, a lot of the for-profit companies, there are penalties. So if you're with a for-profit company, you need to find out if there's a penalty for making a change, if you want to make a change into WinPower. But that's up to you and your relationship with that for-profit company. The other piece of WinPower that I think is awesome is so the state has what's called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, and it's renewable power coming into our system, so wind turbines and solar, and that goes up 1% every year. We just went from 12% in 2017 to 13% in 2018. And that is up to Eversource or National Grid to buy that renewable power that comes into their pool of electricity. For WinPower, we're saying, okay, that's good. We like renewable power. We want to make sure it's from the Commonwealth. We want to support the turbine that's in our state or the solar panels in our state that creates jobs for our high school and college graduates so that we are generating power here instead of buying natural gas and having to create pipelines that come in from Pennsylvania or encourage fracking in Ohio and Pennsylvania or upper New York State or wherever. We're trying to create local renewable energy so that we can, be a little energy independent. You hear that phrase at the national level. We want to make Massachusetts a little bit more energy independent. So WinPower supports renewable energy in Massachusetts. And WinPower puts a 5% adder. We are 5% above that renewable portfolio standard. So instead of being at 13%, WinPower is at 18% renewable, and it's all local. So that's a real force in the marketplace, sending a message that we want to use clean, green energy rather than building the next pipeline into Massachusetts. So it's had an impact on the state level. There are 5 communities, Winchester's one of them, who've done this 5% adder. And you know what? Boston, in the fall, the city council passed the same thing. Other communities are passing the same thing. It's sending a very powerful message within this Commonwealth that, yeah, the residents want to have clean energy. Yeah, the residents don't necessarily want to have that next pipeline that comes through whoever's backyards to bring in natural gas. So it's changing the conversation at the state level. So I think that's something our town can be proud of. We are helping to change that conversation, and we're saving money while we're doing it. So I see it as a win-win. So we'll call it WinPower. So that's kind of how we got here. So I've just been describing WinPower, which is the standard that you will default into. There's also WinPower 100. If you like that renewable message, if you want to think of yourself as being carbon neutral, not contributing to greenhouse gases, you can get 100% renewable energy. And right now, that's only 3% more than you'd be paying if you were on Eversource Basic. So you can opt into WinPower 100. It's not that much more expensive, and then you'll be getting all of your electricity from local renewable energy. It's like buying solar panels for your roof, but much cheaper. So that's what WinPower 100 is. And I think increasingly people are doing that as we see changes in the climate and the environment. And if we want to feel like we're helping to be part of the solution, that's a way to be part of the solution. And this is just a graph that shows you Eversource. I've tried to explain how Eversource, you just don't know what the next bar is going to do on that graph. The WinPower graph is going to be, for 30 months, just solid, just straight across. And same with WinPower 100. That rate will not change. It's a 30-month contract. And just to give you a little perspective, the town of Winchester has not been on Eversource Basic for years. The hospital is not on Eversource Basic. It feels like, oh, well, Eversource, that's my power company. They get their bills from Eversource, but they've been on separate contracts. Mr. Cummings would not be on Eversource Basic. These people negotiate for the town. We negotiate a good rate on electricity. And then we get our bills from Eversource, but we get our supply from somebody else, so we can get a lower price. So this is simply taking the residents of Winchester, pulling together and trying to get that common rate that can be lower and more predictable than Eversource Basic. So that's what I have. I want to introduce very briefly, we have a resident here who is on the Finance Committee and the Capital Planning Committee and the Energy Management Committee. Brian Vernaglia has put together a chart about his house. So you can see what it looks like for his house. After 30 months, yes, we will go out for another bid and we'll try to time it so we get a really good rate. So hopefully we can continue to provide consistent rates and save you money. That's the objective. And then hopefully you can ignore the calls at dinner time. That's the other objective.
So as Susan said, Brian Vernalia, I'm on FinCom, which is the finance committee in town, and somebody actually asked us, is this a good deal for the town? And I should say for the residents of the town, because the town is neither making money nor losing money. The town actually is just doing this as a service. So I sat down responding to this person. I said, well, let me look at my own energy use. So my house I have a family of 4. We have a 2,000 square foot colonial house. We have a couple of window air conditioners. We have actually 2 refrigerators. We have 1 zone of electric heating, but mostly we have oil. So we're a fairly typical family of 4 in a house. And then I looked at the actual energy use that we used over January to June and July to December. The reason I did that is because, as Susan said, the Eversource default rates will change every 6 months, whereas the WinPower rate will not change. So I looked at added up all the kilowatt hours I used, and then I looked at how much we would pay. So this is estimated cost because obviously we don't know how much electricity we're going to use this coming next 6 months, but we know how much we used last year. And so for the January to June time period, at the default Eversource rate, we would pay $609 for our electricity. And when using WinPower, which is the default service that Susan was just talking about, we would have paid $515. So that would be a savings of $94. And now this past half a year, we actually would have paid an additional $6 to use WinPower, because as she said, it was slightly above the rate when they went out to bid. So if we look at our whole year, using the actual energy rates and the actual amount of energy we used last year, we would stand to save $88 on our electricity supply costs. And that's then, again, just the half that you get, which is the supply. It's not the part that's from Eversource that we have no control over. We pay that just based on being customers of Eversource. So for us, that was about an 8% estimated savings on our power supply costs. And now, again, being on FinCom, we multiplied $88 by the number of households in town, and it's significant savings for the town as a whole. Let me rephrase that again, for the residents of the town as a whole. Again, the town does not make any money. The town does not lose any money. It's just a service to the residents. So Susan just asked if I would come and share this, because I'd shared this with FinCom. I'd shared it with the Energy Management Committee, because, again, it's just a data point that we are, in fact, saving money in our household. So an 8%, it's not bad. I mean, considering it was no work on our part. Work on others' part, but not on our part. So just that simple for us. So the WinPower 18%. I just went with what happened naturally. While I'm very supportive of renewable energy, I'm also on the finance committee, so I wanted to be paying as little as possible for my electricity. So I went with what was the WinPower, what's the name of it? WinPower, just WinPower. Just WinPower, yes. Yes. And so that rate is, what did we determine it was? 10.898 cents per kilowatt hour.
So, good question. On the supply line of your bill, you know how there's a gazillion lines. One says supply. And if there is a name next to that, that is the name of the company that is providing your supply. And the supplier for WinPower is Dynegy, the winning bidder. So when we got the good rate, we had, 5 or 6 companies bidding, and we picked from a whole chart of, do we want 12 months, 36 months? That was the best bid. So look for Dynegy, Dynegy.
It's too bad it doesn't say WinPower. Would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just supply. So I just looked at supply. Ballpark, the supply and the distribution are about the same price. I mean, you can look at your own bill and you'll see that if you have $100 in supply costs, you have about $100 in distribution costs. It's not exact, but it's approximately that. And so this is just the supply. So if you wanted to then look, it probably is more like 4% of your overall bill, because the other portion, the distribution, we have no control over that. So that was a good question. It's just the supply.
Distribution fee, the lines and so on.
Yes, they can change that all the time. I don't know exactly how it's regulated.
They filed with the AG asking for a big increase last November. And I think the AG, the Attorney General, is asking them to relook at that the increase they were asking for was, in her opinion, very large. And the latest I heard, but I'm probably not up to the minute, was that they came back with a lower number. But yes, Eversource is filing to increase their all their distribution and all those other charges. Okay, next up is Eugenia. Eugenia is here from the Mass Consumer Energy Alliance. And remember how I said we buy our renewable energy is from the Commonwealth. So Eugenia works for the organization that is that makes sure that those projects are developed.
So I'm with an organization called MassEnergy. We are a nonprofit consumer and environmental advocacy organization that's been around since 1982. Our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to help Massachusetts transition to a low carbon economy. So in a nutshell, we're really dedicated to making sure that Massachusetts meets its clean energy and climate objectives that are mandated by law. And we do that by helping individuals and communities be as green as they possibly can with their electricity usage and their purchases of electricity or fossil fuel using services. We have a discount heating oil service as well. And we try to make it as green as possible, as affordably as possible. We're really, really committed to making sure that the solutions that folks adopt are affordable. As I mentioned, we've been around for over 3 decades. We are involved in electric vehicles, energy efficiency, solar. How many folks are familiar with the Solarize campaign? Winchester was a Solarize community, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We ran a program for the Commonwealth called Solar Connect, which was a statewide solarized program. So helping folks install solar on their homes if they were not in a solarized community like Winchester was. So I'm going to do my best to cover some of the basics of renewable electricity and then answer any other questions you might have about how WinPower relates to the state's overall goals and objectives to be as green as possible. So a couple things that are worth noting. Massachusetts has a law on the books called the Global Warming Solutions Act. I mention that only because it sets a requirement that Massachusetts reduce its greenhouse gas emissions or combat climate change by 2020 and again by 2050. The best way to do that, there are lots of ways that we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to tackle emissions in all kinds of sectors, transportation, heating, cool, everything. But the best way to do that and the best way to achieve really deep emission reductions is to green up your electricity supply. So the state already has a requirement to be greener. And the RPS that Susan spoke about is one mechanism that the state has employed to make sure that new renewable energy comes online. But that only happens at a pretty slow pace. It increases about 1% per year. So if we relied on the renewable portfolio standard to get us to the greenest electricity possible, it would be like 2080 before we had fully renewable power. So the other way to do that, or a way to complement the RPS, is to do what Winchester is doing and what other communities are doing. And that's to say, you know what? We use electricity. Our homes use them. Our small businesses use electricity. So we want to use that purchasing power. We want to leverage the electricity that we use and make sure it's as green as possible. And so that's what WinPower is doing. That's why that 5% more per year matters, because it helps to accelerate the pace at which we're turning to more renewable resources. And the way that the state keeps track of that is something called a Renewable Energy Certificate, or a REC. I hope this slide has the animation that it usually does. I apologize. Oh, it doesn't. Okay. So usually what happens is when a project gets built, there's no way to really know, like, oh, that electron's coming to my house from that wind turbine. The only way to do that is to have something that's sort of a way to track the green component of the renewable project. There's electricity that's generated and there's a green component. So every single time you as Winchester residents buy renewable electricity or enroll in WinPower, every time you do that, a turbine is going to spin. It's going to generate one of these RECs, so a green component that can be measured, and that's going to, the electricity will go into your house, so you can say you have green electricity, and the REC, that tracking mechanism is going to be monitored at the state level and retired on your behalf. It's much more easy. It's much more fun to look at this slide when there's animation. Makes it a little easier to follow. But the long and short of it is, you can claim you're greening up your electricity because no one else is taking that green attribute that you just helped put onto the grid by enrolling in WinPower. It belongs to you, and it's being set aside on your behalf. The reason why that matters, the reason why it matters when communities do this, is because then the utilities who still have to comply with the RPS that Susan spoke about, they have to get their RECs somewhere else, which means it helps to drive demand for new renewable projects. And that's how you're accelerating the pace at which renewables are coming online. Does that make sense? So it matters. It has a big impact. It's a local action that you can take as a community that really drives change at the state level, but also at the regional level, because we are on a regional grid. So this map here is a little bit outdated, but mostly shows the places where MassEnergy gets those RECs from, those renewable energy certificates. So as the REC provider for WinPower, we are going out into the market and trying to find projects in state that can be used to meet your additional green power requirement. And you can see from this map, and I'm happy to make these slides available through Susan if you need them later, the RECs are coming from projects like St. Mary's Abbey, which is down in Rentham. I highly recommend visiting them. If you have not, you should. They make wonderful chocolate, and they have turbines on the ground. There are a number of them. The McGlynn School over in Medford has a turbine. There's a turbine in Lynn. That's another one that's fun. My 5-year-old daughter has signed her name on the inside of the Lynn turbine. So these are projects that you can actually see in the communities around you. You can actually point to them, and you can take pride in knowing, all right, I've had a hand in making sure that more of these get built. This is just a quick note. Why wind power? There's some wind and solar in the mix, but wind is especially important because it's the most affordable, no carbon resource we have. We have an abundance of wind available to us in Massachusetts. We want to take advantage of that. There's solar opportunities and solar potential as well, but wind is really, if you think about it, like Massachusetts is at the end of the energy pipeline. You probably have heard this 1,000 times. We spend a lot of money to bring fossil fuel resources in. We have no indigenous resources, fossil resources in Massachusetts. We have an abundance of wind and solar, and so that's why we support wind, because it's actually the cheapest non-emitting resource we have. And then the last slide I'll point to, this just goes back to, really drives home the point that was just made about how affordable wind power, or what we're calling these green aggregations, really are relative to the Eversource basic service rate. So as a regulated utility, Eversource does have to go before the Department of Public Utilities every 6 months and get its rates approved for the supply that it's purchasing for the next 6 months. And this past fall, they announced their most recent rates. And you can see at the bottom, the Eversource basic service rate is slightly more expensive than the Winchester WinPower default option. And the can you see this line right there? So I just want to break that down for you a little bit. Remember, Eversource is going out to purchase supply. Only 13% of it in 2018 has to be renewable. They've done that and come back with a price of almost a rate of almost 11 cents. WinPower Winchester went out to bid for a 30-month period, got more renewable electricity than Eversource, more than is required by law, and came back at a basic rate that's less than Eversource's basic service rate. And if you were to opt up to the 100% option, you'd be getting 100% local, in-state, in-region renewable power for just, gosh, I mean, it's like almost next to nothing compared to the Eversource. The basic service rate from January to June is going to be a little over 13 cents. And for Winchester, for the 100%, it's right there with it for the basic service default supply. So you get 100% renewable for the same that you would be paying to get just 13% renewable through Eversource. So the long and short, if you don't remember this graphic, just remember this. Because of what WinPower's done, because of what Susan has described, Winchester went out and got even more renewable energy for an affordable rate, and it's delivering that to the residents and small businesses in Winchester. And in exchange, Winchester's demonstrating for other communities and for the state that we can actually have more renewable power faster than we are required to by law, that we can do it at an affordable rate, and that we don't necessarily need to be investing in things like massive pipelines that would be cutting through our backyards. So I went a little over my 5 minutes, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have. This is my contact information. Sure. Yeah. The question is, how much per kilowatt hour are we paying for the RECs?
Well, the wind RECs themselves are running between $25 and $28 for wind power RECs. Yeah.
Sorry, we should back up. This is John. This is John O'Rourke. He's here from Good Energy. Good Energy is the broker that the town used when we were doing our procurement to get all the bids when we went out to bid. So you use a broker. John is from the broker.
Yes.
Can you tell me what MassEnergy is and how it's funded, please? The organization that you represent.
Sure. So MassEnergy is a nonprofit advocacy organization. We are funded through, we're self-funded. We have a member program, a couple of different member programs. Our Green Power program is an individual, so it's an individual, sort of like your aggregation. Individual households can become members and green up their electricity supply. We also have a discount heating oil service that we have run since '82. All of our funding comes from memberships from those programs. We also do receive some grant funding to do things like advocacy and education and outreach around renewable projects. We're self-sustaining in that way. Yeah. We are a licensed REC dealer, I guess. So what's the proper terminology?
Essentially, when we put this project together for actually all the communities that Eugenia had on her graph, we went to MassEnergy for the renewable energy certificates because they're the gold standard in the market to source these. Their prices were the lowest, and they also had the best supply of those RECs. So we partnered with them to get our RECs from them when we put these projects together.
Yeah. And I would just add one thing. When John says gold standard, the reason is because we are a Massachusetts-based nonprofit who's committed to making sure Massachusetts becomes greener, we only work with what are called Massachusetts Class 1 RPS RECs. So only projects that meet the standard for the renewable portfolio standard requirement. They have to be in region, they have to be new wind, new solar, new renewable projects. There are others out there who might claim green or might claim to be greener than they are, but they're relying on RECs from projects that are out of region and out of state, and that just out of region and out of the RPS region, and that doesn't do very much to transform our regional grid. So
I'd like to just add to what Eugenia said. She mentioned Class 1 RECs. Class 1 means that it instigated a new project. So you've heard the term greenwashing. So if you get a call at dinner time and they're saying, oh, this is great wind power, it could be Class 3 RECs or something down the food chain. It's not creating new energy if it's down the food chain. It's just reselling a renewable energy credit that's old. So this is getting into the weeds, but the fact that it's class 1 means every single rec is helping to generate a new project. So, for example, Ipswich, when Ipswich wanted to do wind power, what bank loans to a town? So the town was able to go to a nonprofit instead of a bank that would charge high interest. And the town was able to build their project because they could partner with a nonprofit who has a gold standard reputation. So MassEnergy has become a really important player for municipalities in this marketplace. There's quite a bit of hydro coming into the Commonwealth. So TransCanada, Constellation, lots of brokers buy that energy. The town of Winchester is mostly run on hydro. So yeah, that energy is definitely coming in. It's the one that's been in the news is a new project that they're trying to get up, but it sounds like New Hampshire's put the kibosh on that one. We can't get the whole state or the town on 100% renewable like this, although we would like to. And the technologies are changing so fast for wind turbines, for solar, for battery storage. Massachusetts is on the leading edge of trying to get battery storage scalable and into the marketplace. But that's all a work in progress. So that answer does not exist yet, but it's a really good question.
You know, essentially, most of us, when we flip a white light switch and the lights go on, that's all we know about what's happening, okay? We're part of what's called the New England ISO, okay, the grid that's basically runs all of the 6 New England towns, runs the electricity for it. The situation in their control room looks like NASA. They are turning on, turning off generation all times of the day to make sure that demand, the amount that we demand in electricity, is equal to the amount of supply that's being generated. It's an extremely complex problem. There's natural gas plants, there's coal plants, there's oil plants. There's renewable energy that comes online with wind, solar, anaerobic digestion. There's all kinds of sources that they need to balance on a minute-by-minute basis to keep up with supply. So that's why your situation, your question is so complicated. There's no real answer to that at any one point in time. It depends on what's happening with demand. If you're talking about solar RECs are running $250 to $285. So they're about 10 times what your wind RECs are. So that's why we use most of the time, and that's why we have mostly wind power, because the RECs are less expensive.
Chester.
Yep, Dynegy is the winning bidder.
I understand that,
Yeah.
I understand that, but I only understand that because I'm here now. Why could you not, as part of your negotiation with Dynegy and others, require them to put wind power somewhere on the bill so people understand without, wind power ought to have its name all over the bill.
That Eversource is the one generating the bill, so that is a very good suggestion, particularly, especially as more and more communities begin to undertake aggregations like this. But Eversource at this moment is the one that generates the bill, and I can say from our own experience, my organization's own experience working with our own individual green power program, it's a lot harder than you might think to get them to switch it over.
Who regulates
And
that?
anyone who supplies electricity in the state, it has a license to do that with the Department of Public Utilities.
So Viridian is an example of a competitive supplier. And as John noted, in Massachusetts, in order to be a competitive supplier, you do have to meet certain requirements, and you're licensed by the Department of Public Utilities. You're not regulated in the way that a utility is, or even wind power had to be approved by the Department of Public Utilities before Winchester could introduce it and to you all as residents. So that's a long way of saying to you that competitive suppliers might be licensed, but they are not regulated in the same way that a regulated distribution company is, which is why it is often very difficult for individual households to ensure that they're getting the greatest bang for their buck when they sign up for a competitive supplier. The benefit of competitive supply is really realized when you go out to purchase in bulk and you have a lot of electricity that you're buying for, and you're using that to negotiate savings. So that is why this aggregation that Winchester has done makes sense. They've gone out to bid competitively and selected a supplier through a competitive process and developed a plan that has to be approved by the regulatory agency in the Commonwealth, and then it gets introduced to you. That's different than someone calling me up, in the evening and saying, you have the right to sign up with me. As a consumer advocacy organization, full disclosure, we often do caution folks against signing up with a competitive supplier without reading the fine print, because there can be changes made without you realizing it until you get the bill.
So probably about 8 or 9 years ago, somebody knocked on my door and said, we're selling green energy. Don't you want to go 100%? We got this great rate. I had 2 little kids at home. I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Signed up. And then we went to, green billing. Let's put our bill online so I don't get a paper thing anymore. And then we went to automatic payment. So the bank just paid it. So I wasn't even looking at my bill. And come to find out, I had one of these companies that, I don't know if it was a 2-year contract, but it had been so long ago that they were changing my rate who knows how often, and I was paying way more than the 100% green.
So the question was, did everybody switch over to WinPower, or did you have to sign up for it? Excuse me, it's an opt-out program. If you were already on basic service with Eversource, you were automatically enrolled into the default option through WinPower, which is the 5% renewable, 5% more. If you were on a competitive supplier, or somehow not receiving basic service from Eversource, then you would have to opt into the program.
And I think that's also really important to know that if you were not on Eversource Basic, and I wasn't, because I was waiting for my letter last May and I never got a letter, so I thought something must be up, and something was up. So I called my competitor and they said I wasn't on a contract, so then I just called Dynegy, and they took care of it, and the next month I was on WinPower. So you do have to call. But that's helpful to know, because if you get a phone call from somebody, it's not WinPower. You have to call Dynegy, which is the number on here.
The comment was perhaps a different name.
Yes. The town entered into a 30-month contract that began on July 1st. So it follows our fiscal year, and then as we're nearing the end of that, we'll try to be strategic about going out to bid to capture the best deal for the residents, and that's what we're committed to. We're also committed to putting a flyer like you got in your water bill in every 6 months, so when we know what Eversource next rate is, it's in the Star, it's in the Times Chronicle, it's on the town website, and it's in your water bill. You're not going to get a phone call. We don't have the manpower. You're looking at it. Hi, Chrissy. Here we are. So we'll have forums like this. We're happy to answer your questions. Just know the town's not making a nickel. This is a public service. We'll try to reach out the best way we can. If you have questions, you can call DPW, you can call town manager's office, the town planner will help answer your questions. But this is really the town just trying to do the best we can for you. So yeah, we're 6 months in. We've got 24 months left as of January 1st. So really 21 months or 23 months or whatever. So yeah, we're plugging away. Yeah, the next time we go out to bid, who knows what's going to happen with the rates for renewable energy. So the question is, could we expand our group?
I want to, as a point of reference, I'll just let you know that so there are 145 communities in Massachusetts that are doing this, what Susan described early on as municipal aggregation, basically just purchasing electricity in bulk for their residents. There are only a handful that are doing green aggregation, so committing to doing cleaner electricity. And even within that subgroup, there's just a even smaller group, this vanguard group that's really doubling down and saying, we want the kind of green electricity that has an impact in our state. And so this is really kind of a new thing where communities are considering how they can leverage their electricity supply to help bring Massachusetts along faster. And I love the idea of doing a broader aggregation across multiple communities, if there's a way to address some of the concerns that Susan just pointed out. But I will say that I know that at least in in this area, part of the reason how this came to be was because of the work of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and them looking at ways to serve the 101 communities that they work with. So that's one type of, like, they've created resources and technical assistance for those communities. And maybe there's a potential within there for folks to aggregate as a whole. But in the western part of the state, there are a couple of towns that are already thinking about ways to do an aggregation, a green aggregation like WinPower across multiple communities, because they just realized it's a really good way to drive demand for new renewables.
We have an aggregation of 23 municipalities, mostly in Bristol and Plymouth counties, with about 215,000 households that all went out to bid together.
You had mentioned that Winchester is 100%, Winchester town municipal is 100% hydro.
No, it's close. It's
How
close.
close? How close?
Well, it depends on, we're dollars and cents. So we were with TransCanada. We were with TransCanada for our competitive supply until a year ago, and TransCanada is largely hydro, but we just shifted to Constellation last year because they beat TransCanada on the rates, and I don't know Constellation's assortment as well as I used to know the TransCanada, so I can't answer that.
But hydro is, so hydro is not a class 1 resource. So hydro, again, the thing that makes WinPower special, there are many things that make it special, but the thing that really makes it special compared to other aggregations is this commitment, a firm commitment to class 1 RECs, new wind, new renewables that can come online. Hydro is not a new resource, so while it might be cleaner, it's not a new project. It's not helping to transform in that way. The value of the renewable energy certificate that's traded in a market, and the demand for those projects helps set the value for those RECs, and that is what makes projects financeable.
So in terms of solar, we're kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit on how the state is trying to get to. There's the state legislature passed a whole program on how we're going to transition our electricity and our power future for the state. So how they navigate that, for example, there's a huge RFP out right now for offshore wind. And we're waiting to hear the answers on that. So nobody really knows what the economics of that one is going to be like. There are projects that towns and for-profit organizations are trying to come up with that RECs are actually now a thing of the past for solar. There's a new program at the state level called SMART, so that any new solar projects coming up have a completely different rubric for how they're being incentivized at the state level. And that's the Baker administration's effort to try to
create a sustainable business model for developing solar in Massachusetts. I just want to be really clear, though, to your point about it's not that it's a subsidy. The renewable portfolio standard is a requirement that has to be met by utilities. So that is putting out there that there is a certain level of demand for these projects, and that's helped driving the price and the market for REC development. There's an RPS in all the New England states. It's not just Massachusetts. It just happens that we have one of the purest ones. And then that's a mandate that needs to be met. This is something called a voluntary purchase of green power that's further enhancing that demand and making it even greater so that we get more projects online.
Yeah, so RECs are not a check from the state. That's not like tax money going. It's an open market, and the value of RECs rises and falls with the demand.
That's what SMART is the SMART program, and I'm not up on the most current, the finalized version of it, but the SMART solar program, sustainable, Massachusetts, renewable, forgive me, SMART, that's intended to create a sustainable model for promoting the development of solar to get away from this model that we have now where we're paying high REC prices.
So this new program, the SMART, so RECs, people were just getting to know RECs, and RECs are now, there are a lot of projects that have them grandfathered in, but any new projects, just FYI, watch this space. We're trying to get rooftop solar on our lovely new high school. So we will be learning about the SMART program as we're trying to figure out how we're going to get solar on Winchester High School and Vincent Owen and Ambrose and the DPW. So we're working on it.
Program. The RECs that are excuse me, the recs for wind power all come from wind power, right? From wind.
And a little bit of cow power.
And a little bit of cow power. They're not coming from cogen projects. If you are currently on Eversource's basic service rate, you got opted into this program. You're already in the program.
Did you opt out?
No, I did not do anything.
Okay, then you are in this program.
So I don't have to make a.
On your bill, it should say Dynegy next to the supply line, and that means you're in wind power.
You're a winner with wind power. I just adding on to that, as an advocate who's working in this space to help communities do more, I often refer to Susan and to Winchester as an example of places that are doing innovative things and doing more.
Thank you all very much for coming along. We appreciate it.